buff and blue were not our first colors. We had one color, and it was pink.
Dave Bolger here, and welcome to Had I Known, an exploration of the Hamilton College experience. This week, we welcome back John Werner for his Hamilton History Tour. Some unfortunate news this week as the NESCAC announced the suspension of winter sports. Not surprising news, but still unfortunate nonetheless, and you continue to feel bad for the student athletes, especially the seniors, who just saw their final season of college sports get wiped away by this pandemic. And that news makes the idea that last week's guest John Werner shared seem even more important. If you haven't checked out that conversation yet, at the end, John shared an idea about harnessing the power of the NESCAC schools to come together in a different way, to identify solutions to some of society's biggest problems. And if you did listen to the episode, it'll come as no surprise to you that John has made great strides in bringing that idea to life already in just a week's time. He checked in late this week to say that he's talked to key people at all 11 NESCAC schools. He's drummed up significant interest. He says he now has a focused idea on how to make this happen, and he also wants people to know that if anyone is interested in joining him in bringing this idea to life, you can reach out to him at jwerner, Jwerner, at linkventures.com. jwerner at link, L-I-N-K, ventures.com. As you heard last week, if there's anybody who can pull off bringing together all 11 NESCAC schools to do good in the world, it's someone like John Werner, so it's going to be fun to watch this come together. Hey, have you heard about this big event coming up Tuesday night, Tuesday, October 13th? We're going to be doing a virtual live Had I Known, where Hamilton College is going to be turning the tables on me and having someone ask me questions. Award-winning filmmaker David Gaines, yes, our guest from episode 2, is going to be asking me questions for a change. And he has promised me nothing but softballs. So if you're interested in hearing a live Had I Known with a twist, go to hamilton.edu/events, and you can register for that show on the 13th. And I do hope to see many of you that night. Should be a lot of fun. Again, hamilton.edu/events. And if you want to do a little prep work for Tuesday night, go on back and listen to my conversation with David Gaines from episode 2. I really enjoyed that one. It was an early one, but it solidified for me almost right out of the gate that this was going to be something I enjoyed doing based on that conversation with David. And now he's going to pay me back by asking me hard questions and embarrassing me in front of my listeners. So it's going to be fun. If you want to listen to that conversation, go to hadiknown.buzzsprout.com. Again, hadiknown.buzzsprout.com. You can listen to that and catch up on anyone you've missed, but I don't know why you would have missed one. You should be listening to every single episode. Come on now. What's wrong with you? And speaking of Buzzsprout, I got to tell you, today is a great day to start your own podcast. I mean, you listen to this one, you're saying, this guy can do it. Clearly, I can do that too. Well, time to start. Whether you're looking for a new marketing channel, have a message you want to share with the world, or if you just think it would be fun to have your own talk show, podcasting is an easy, inexpensive, and fun way to expand your reach online. And Buzzsprout is hands down the easiest and best way to launch, promote, and track your podcast. Your show can be online and listed in all major podcast directories like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, and more within minutes of finishing your recording. Podcasting isn't hard when you have the right partners, and the team at Buzzsprout is passionate about helping you succeed. Join over 100,000 podcasters already using Buzzsprout to get their message out to the world. Just sign up using the link in the show notes, and that'll let Buzzsprout know we sent you, and you're going to get a $20 Amazon gift card. Buzzsprout, the easiest way to start your podcast. All right, Let's get into this week's show. All right, I mentioned last week's guest, John Werner, and, well, he's this week's guest as well. You heard him mention in last week's conversation a passion for the history of the school, so much so that he spent time in the archives and turned that knowledge into a weekly walking history tour of the school. Now, in that conversation I had with him, I also asked him to share a version of that walking tour and what people would experience on that. I saved that part of the conversation for this week. And there are some interesting stories in here, including a few personal ones for John that I found really interesting. Now, I've heard some of you like to listen to this show while you're out on a walk or a run. If you are, pretend that you are walking the campus of Hamilton College as John Werner takes you on one of his classic tours. If you're not walking, you can still go on the tour. Just sit, close your eyes, and envision walking along the campus as John points out some interesting history about Hamilton College.
I put in the Daily Bull on Sunday, who wants to go on a tour and learn the history of the college? And I did that all 4 years. And I was really, really proud of that. Every Sunday I would do it. No two tours were alike. It was like improv jazz. They went on for hours. It was like a dance marathon where people would say, mercy, I give up. And people would just leave in the middle. But I had so much I wanted to share. And I loved it. And, there's a lot of interesting history and I loved it.
Can you give me some highlights of the tour?
Sure. So, most students, except for during the pandemic, when they matriculate, they sign the card that they're coming to Hamilton inside the Kirkland Cottage. Mm-hmm. And people know Samuel Kirkland, whose son went on to be the president of Harvard and created Harvard Law School, John Kirkland. Samuel Kirkland, who had gone to Princeton and came out west and worked with the Oneidas and proselytized them on Christianity and created the Hamilton Oneida Academy. He lived in that house, and the college, has the house in a prominent place. It used to be down at the base of the college, and then they moved it to the cemetery. And in the 1920s, it moved to where it is now. Mm-hmm. But when you walk in it, it's like saying, look, this is a humble guy. It's like as if he's Amish. He lived in that house for just a few weeks. There's a bigger house that he really lived in, and this was like his like starter house as his other house was being built. And it's the Harding Farm, and the Kirkland College with President Babbitt would meet there a lot. And if you really want to know how Samuel Kirkland lived, the Kirkland Cottage doesn't do it justice. You got to go check out the Harding Farm. So that was one thing I was proud. I felt like it was an expose. So the next thing is Hamilton tuition. What's tuition today for the college? It's a lot, right?
Yeah.
Now in 1812, when the college started, the school started in 1796 as an academy, but when the college got accredited in 1812, you had to pay the tuition for the whole year at the beginning of the year. It was $6. And if you wanted a master's degree, because there were some master degrees they offered, it was $5 on top of the $6.
It's been big money then, yeah.
Yeah. Now I could go into how much when
Sure.
it got. I know the increases or whatever, but I just think for shock value that puts things in perspective.
Yeah.
There's a guy named Garrett Smith, and I talked to Professor Ambrose as I was getting ready for this talk, and he says hi, by the way. Ambrose on his door has a picture of Garrett Smith, and Garrett Smith graduated in 1818, and he was the Bill Gates of his era, and he was a philanthropist. And he funded a lot of the abolitionist movement. So this is, slavery. There were leaders, and if you look at any history of the abolition movement, Garrett Smith was a key guy. So I'm kind of proud of him. Now the college is really proud of having kids who are first generation going to college. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
So what I think is interesting, in the early days of the institution, it was a rural institution. And young men of modest means, it was men who would come, yep. And they were from families who had not sent their kids to college. So we're getting first gen college kids now, but in the early days, we got those kids. And the kids that went to Harvard and Yale and Princeton were the merchant class of the times. And these kids were kids from farms and a lot of the local economic opportunities were evaporating because industrialization, the country was changing, and Hamilton helped prepare kids to be clergymen and teachers because those were growing opportunities. And the president would teach a morals and ethics class and Bible study, and a lot of the other NESCAC schools started as seminaries or Bible study schools. And so that's an interesting beginning. And then the students got wise and they said, we want to have fun. And Hamilton, with Union, is the first, started the first network of fraternities. And Sigma Phi is the first national fraternity between two different campuses. Mm-hmm. And what I think is interesting is as you drive up College Hill Road, even before you drive up, there's a big building, it's red, and it's now the Kirkland Library. That was the first Sigma Phi national fraternity outside of the mother chapter, which was at Union. And it's down at the bottom of the College Hill because it shows that the students would be social off campus. It wasn't really a college thing. Now, do you know the college colors today? Do you know when if you want to represent what colors you should wear?
Buff and blue.
Yep, that is the Continental colors, and Baron von Steuben, who was the drill master for the Continental Army, laid the stone that started the academy. Mm-hmm. But buff and blue were not our first colors. We had one color, and it was pink. Did you know that before?
I did not know that. I did not know.
So
that.
now you know.
There you go.
I know you are a sports guy, and you were recruited for football, and you did rugby. So I got a few sports statistics from around 1900. So there was a football game with Union that was tied. The score was 4-4. So I don't know how you can tie 4-4. Like maybe
something's off there. Yeah.
That same year there was a basketball game that we tied with Colgate, and it was 12-12. I thought you'd appreciate that. Yeah,
a riveting one there for sure.
Yeah, and then I found a Union newspaper from 1936 that had 10 articles on it, and it was all about the Hamilton Union football game, and they had all the lists of the Hamilton players, and they listed how the last 40 games, it was 10 ties, 16 wins for Hamilton, 17 wins for Union, and how this game was the game. And so I thought that was interesting that it was kind of like the rivalry between Army and Navy. It was really intense. Yeah. You know, when would you see a Hamilton paper that listed all the biographies of the Union players playing on Sunday? Right. So there's that, and then the team of 1895 lost to Union by 96-0. So I thought that was an interesting score. And then my last kind of sports story here is in 1900, our football team racked up 254 points, and 8 teams did not score 1 point, 1 touchdown. And we lost to only one team, and we lost to them 11-0, and that was West Point. So 1900, that was if you want to do an IG Magini and go back in time, that would be a team to watch or
for sure. On. Every game was a shutout. Wow.
Yep. So here's a little story that I don't think a lot of people know about. There are these 2 twins, the Roston brothers. They were born in the 1920s on Long Island, and they both came to Hamilton and Middlebury. They went to 2 different NESCAC schools. They weren't in the NESCAC league yet because it hadn't been formed. And they were both at the twins were at both schools for 2 years. And then World War II, they went to Italy and served in the army for 2 years. And Robert switched places with William. And Robert went to Middlebury and William went to Hamilton. And they graduated 2 years later. And they didn't tell anyone that they had switched. So I thought that was kind of funny. And Robert went on to make scoreboards for baseball stadiums. He sold them, and a lot of them in the 70s were he helped make happen. So that's a little trivia for that. Bob Moses, I know you interviewed the class of 56. Yep. If you read any biography on Martin Luther King Jr., and you open up the back and just read down the index, the person probably referenced the most after Martin Luther King is going to be Bob Moses. Yeah. He was such a great organizer, and a great man. Alex Haley, when he came to Hamilton, people know that he wrote a book called Roots, but it was a Hamilton student from Africa that he traveled back to Africa with him and met in a village that helped make Roots possible. So I think that's kind of a nice connection.
Yeah.
Kirkland campus, I think a lot of these small liberal arts schools are beautiful, but not all of them have a campus like the architecture that the Kirkland campus affords our setting. And I think it attracted a lot of very liberal professors. It was an all-women's school. The school didn't go co-ed all at once, where women were kind of second-class citizens. Women had an identity for 10 years. I know the merger was very rocky, and if you get a bunch of Kirkland alums, they'll talk about that. And I actually think part of the reason U.S. News and World Report ranked us low when it first came out was we were still coming out of that tough integration time. But I will say Ben Thompson was the architect who designed the campus. And I think it was originally supposed to be out for the Midwest. It wasn't a very good design for central New York. And
flat roofs and
big glass windows. But I'll tell you, while you look at it, it may not be pretty. The glass windows, what you look out at is really pretty. And I think, as people get to know Hamilton as an option, I think Kirkland campus is very special, a very unique part of it. And then the Keene Co-op, which is, that's where the kind of the hippies go. I met Silas Keene a bunch. He was the president of the Federal Reserve Bank in Chicago under the Reagan administration. He is not a hippie, or was not a hippie. And I don't know if he got a memo that that's what his family money went to. So I always thought that was interesting. And I know you lived in Dunham, because I've listened to all your shows, and
thank you.
It seems like you have a number of I think the way to get on your show is you have to live in Dunham during your years. That's an easy path. But I don't know. I've heard alumni say this, and I don't know if they were delusional, but they said Dunham was originally built as an all freshman dorm, and they remodeled it and put in doubles, but it used to be all singles. And I've heard from alum, many of them say that they would open up the windows and just let the water out and make an ice rink.
Ice rink in the hallways. Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that as well.
Yeah. So I don't have evidence, and I don't have firsthand knowledge, but I have secondary knowledge, I guess, on that one. So the next point I want to share is that Burke Library, which Hugh Stubbins designed. Hugh also designed the Citicorp building in New York City. That's the building with the triangle that has an interesting silhouette. He designed that library. They took down Truax Hall of Philosophy. The Truax family was very upset, and the pillars that were in front of it was like a mirror of Benedict. The pillars are now in the cemetery. When they took that building down, they put the library there. And if you understand college campuses, you scratch your head. Why are you putting the library, which is a central building, so far to one side? Like the Kirkland campus had already been built, and it was so off to the side. And and for people who really know urban planning or planning of colleges, they'd be like, this is bizarre. So do you know the story as to why it's where it is?
I don't.
So in the 60s, there was a movement that bigger is better. And there was some insecurity that Hamilton might be too small, and that maybe there should be a coordinated college. And Pomona was part of Harvey Mudd and Pitzer and Scripps, and there's the business school there. And there was, for a moment, there was some thought of maybe having a root school of public policy, having a bunch of colleges, and that the women's college was the first, and that the library was actually going to be the new center of the college. And that as they added the other colleges, they would, fill in the other areas. And there's a parking lot right behind the building, because that was set up that if the school or the schools needed more library space, because this was the 20th century and they were thinking about books and atoms, and they weren't thinking about the internet and then Wi-Fi and Zoom. They would just add on the back of the library. And I think that's very interesting. Now, what they didn't anticipate was the oil crisis. And what they didn't anticipate was that that would, close people's minds to spending money on building a new campus. But for a minute, Hamilton thought, to be competitive, it needed to, build these other schools, and that Kirkland was the first of a number of them.
Interesting. That's interesting. I just thought it was great living in North my first year that I could roll out of bed and be in the library.
Yeah. North is where North used to open up the other way, and that's where B.F. Skinner lived when he was on campus. And B.F. Skinner, when he went to the college, he went down to Kirkland and had these red signs printed up. He came back when he was very old, and he told the story. I remember hearing it. And he said he wrote on the sign that Charlie Chaplin was coming to the college. And he put him up everywhere, and people came, and he wasn't there. And that was his version of April Fools. I guess that's what behavioral psychologists do for fun. So I have three people I want to just mention in this closing of some history facts. But I want to say one other thing on history, that there's a guy named Peter Diamandis who is a really special guy. And I know that the Sacerdote family has funded the Great Lectures. I think Peter should be extended a opportunity to come speak to the college.
Interesting.
And Peter is remarkable. He founded the X Prize. The Spirit of St. Louis, how a plane went across the Atlantic, Lindbergh. It was a prize that rallied everyone to do it. And Peter's created the X Prize on all sorts of things: clean the ocean, find alien life, AI, like all sorts of things, education. And he's also founded something called the Singularity University. He also founded something called Bold Capital. And he's one of these true visionaries. And I've met a few people like him. There are these people that are short and they want to be astronauts, and they don't quite make it. And instead they go to MIT and Harvard, and they rally everyone around them. And he's really unique. Well, Peter got his start after he left Long Island. He matriculated to Hamilton College. And he was a very ambitious student, and he wanted to triple major. And Dean Wartimer or someone said no. And so that's why he transferred to MIT. He never graduated from Hamilton, but he got his start at Hamilton. And I think we should welcome him back. And if you Google Peter Diamandis, I think he gets $200,000 per a lecture. He's like one of those kind of one of those kinds of. He talks about exponential this, exponential that, and I'm friends with him, and I know his whole team, and my business partners on his board, the X Prize, and I host the X Prize at MIT a number of times. But I'm really proud that he went to Hamilton for a little bit, even if it was a moment. I know Peter Falk also went to Hamilton.
Yes.
Colombo and the guy in Ghost, Goodwin. But his dad was the Goodwin, as in MGM, and I think that's partly why maybe he had a Hollywood access. Okay, so I want to tell you about three particular people. Hugh is class of 31, and in his 70s, I got to know him. He was in his 70s when I was in my 20s, and we would hang out on campus. And he had just had a stroke. I never met him before his stroke. He went from being a right-handed guy to a left-handed guy. And he had a bike that he would bicycle. It was a tricycle. His feet were in front of him. It was a recumbent bicycle. I had never seen one before. I think now they're a little more mainstream. But he would use this moon buggy to get around campus. And he was low to the ground. He was very curious. He soon after graduating from Hamilton, he went to MIT. He had the patent for the chemical transistor. He created the self-justifying typewriter, which is like the word processor. And he created a language called Pridlish, which was using predicate calculus. And it was a way to make people speak more efficiently. And it was a way to put lawyers out of business. He didn't want you to hire a lawyer to have to make some legal document to protect you, which is kind of ironic given who his dad and his grandfather are. And I love spending time with this guy. And I was training him for the Kirkland Art Center race. And Hugh is short for Elihu. And he was the grandson of two very famous Hamiltonians. He was the grandson of Melancthon Woolsey Stryker, who was the class of 1872 of Hamilton. And he was the 9th president of Hamilton from 1892 to 1912. Stryker really wanted every student to have to pass Latin to be able to be accepted. I'm glad they changed that. I don't know how you would have done if Latin was the entry. And so
Not so much.
Stryker is the guy that put plumbing inside the dorms. If you have plumbing in North, you had Stryker to thank for that.
Yeah.
Stryker was someone who really elevated the college and took it to another level. And in Hugh's office, he would joke how he had the most pliers in the Mohawk Valley. He was very crafty, but he also had Stryker's desk that Stryker would have used a fountain pen to write all his letters. And Carissima was written by Stryker. And so I just loved that I was hanging out with Melanchthon Woolsey Stryker's grandson. And, I don't know if that gets you excited, but I was like doing seances. It was just awesome.
Real history. It's living history of the college right there. Yeah.
Yeah. But his other grandfather was Elihu Root. And so Hugh was Elihu Root III, and his dad was Elihu Root II. And Hugh gave me his bicycle. I guess during the war effort, things were rationed, and I would bike across campus in the single speed bike. And I felt part of history. And I really enjoyed getting to know this guy and getting to know the college through his eyes. And it was fascinating. Today, I think, where the Kennedy Art Building is, I don't know what they call that. It's kind of a U shape with glass. Yep. Right in front of that is a McKinley and White building that was built. And that was built as a summer home for Elihu Root II, who was class of 1903. The grandfather was class of 1861. And he had lived in what is the admissions office, and that was a tavern. And I would argue that one of the reasons Elihu Root, the one, was so worldly was because this tavern, people would come and stay there on their way to other places. And he grew up, before he even went to college, being exposed to all these interesting people. Went on to be Secretary of State and get the Nobel Prize and U.S. Senator and created the World Court at The Hague. But his grandson, Hugh III, lived in the White House, and it's now like it's faculty offices for the arts place, and it's the Molly Root House. It's named after his wife. And I came to Root's Hugh's funeral in '97 and Molly's in 2007, but I really enjoyed getting to know them. As I was studying the stuff in the basement, there's a guy named Edward Joshua Ward, and he graduated in 1902. And he was from Buffalo. He was a DU. That was the Anti-Secret Society. And he would spend his summers moving ice on the docks of New York City. And he was a football player, big guy. And he did track and field. My guess is he did the field stuff. And he went to Auburn and became a minister. But pretty soon after graduating in 1902, he turned a church into a social center. And he brought in mats for kids to wrestle. And he taught classes for immigrants to learn English, and he created something called the Social Center movement, and he moved it to Rochester, and then to the state of Wisconsin, from the city of Rochester, state of Wisconsin, and then Harding, a Republican, became president and ended up running a reindeer farm. But if you know who Jane Addams is, who created a similar movement, he was a contemporary. So I really identified with this guy. And so I started going to Hamilton College. I grew up in New York City, and I thought Clinton was my thing. I was the one in my family that discovered it. But imagine my surprise when I learned that my grandmother's mother was married right in Clinton, right in the church across the green. And she lived in New York City till her 90s, my grandmother. But apparently her grandmother got married there, and then they moved to Buffalo. And I just got to believe that my grandmother's mother knew this guy, Edward Joshua Ward, and because he was from Buffalo, so that I was really psyched about that. All right, last bit of history. The Sacerdote names are great, and I think everyone feels great about that. But I think students should still organize speakers coming throughout the year. And I was part of Root Jessup. I actually suggested that they add the name Linowitz to the club. Linowitz gave back the Panama Canal, the canal that Elihu Root and President Roosevelt had taken. And Linowitz also created Xerox. He was the lawyer that helped make it a legal company. He was chairman of Xerox for years. But Root Jessup, we got to pick speakers to come, and we created a symposium in 1990, and it was about the judicial nominating process. And we had like 5 people talk on it. It was in Welland Hall, one of the first big events right after like Bobby McFerrin sang there. be happy. And one of the speakers was a guy who had just embarrassed himself a little bit as he was running for president, and he doubled down and was a real leader on stopping the Bork nomination, if you know your judicial history. And that was a senator by the name of Joe Biden. And so, he's running for president today, and I was part of Ruth Jessup, and I got to have dinner with him in the Hazel Backus house, and
wow,
got to hear him speak in Welland, and who knows what'll happen. And we almost did have a U.S. president come to the college. His brother went to the college, and he grew up in Clinton, Grover Cleveland, and he couldn't afford college. His brother was an AD, and a minister said, "Look, I'll pay for you to go to Hamilton, but you got to become a minister." And Grover Cleveland moved to New York and apprenticed to be a lawyer. He didn't want to become a minister, and went on to be president for 2 terms.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's my some history stuff. Any interesting things there? Or
well, I mean, it's all interesting. It's all great.
I could have made it all up too. If I want to, it could be fake news.
It could be, and I'm not going to fact check it. So.
Yeah. You don't have a team of fact checkers.
Yes, well, I'm working on it. Yeah. I'll put my intern on it. All right, there you have it. A little bit of history for you. Anytime I talked to John in my lead up to recording the conversation, and anytime since, he regularly asked me at the end of any conversation, what'd you learn in this conversation that you didn't know before? And I always found that question really interesting. So I ask you, dear listener, in listening to this show, what did you learn that you didn't know before? Because there was some neat stuff in there. Hit us up on social media. Let us know what you learned. Or if you have other historical facts that you want to share them with us on social media. Had I Known Show. Again, Had I Known Show across Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And again, if you want to join up with John's movement to bring together the NESCAC schools to attack some of the world's problems, email him at jwerner@linkventures.com. You have been listening to Had I Known on WHCL-FM, Clinton, New York. Had I Known Show on social media. hadiknown.buzzsprout.com for all previous episodes, including last week's with John Werner, including episode 2 with David Gaines, the host of the upcoming virtual live Had I Known event, hamilton.edu/event to register for that for Tuesday, October 13th. As always, my thanks to Dr. Michael Woods for supplying all the music on this show. And as always, Doc is going to play us out. Hope you enjoyed the show. We'll talk to you next week. And we'll see you on Tuesday.
podcast show on your radio or take it to go.